Welcome to the Kentucky Avery MTSS tutorial on Principles of Effective Instruction. My name is Todd Whitney and I'm a faculty member here at the University of Louisville. It's important for general education teachers to provide instruction so that all students can be successful. But this becomes more challenging when the population they are being asked to teach is becoming more and more diverse. In this module, we will talk about principles of effective instruction. These are principles that can be used as general guidelines when developing, selecting, or modifying instruction in the general education classroom to ensure all students have the opportunity to be successful. First, let's talk about effective instruction. In general, effective instruction involves the teacher bringing about intended outcomes through research-based instructional practices. In this sense, it involves a process-product approach, whereas overt teacher behaviors, or the process, affects student achievement, or the product. For example, if as a teacher my intended outcome is for my student to learn to read, I will implement those instructional practices that have been identified by research to be the most effective for teaching reading. Effective teaching research and educational reform initiatives through the years have alternated between advocating for the use of either an explicit, teacher-directed approach or an implicit, student-centered approach. As you can see by the slide, explicit teaching is behavioral, it requires direct teacher help, it involves teacher regulation of learning, direct instruction, it involves a task analysis, and it involves more of a part-to-whole manner. While implicit teaching is more holistic. It involves limited teacher help, it's student regulation of their own learning, it involves student self-discovery, self-regulated instruction, and then it's more of a whole to part. So when we're using explicit instruction, it's for students that are going to have limited prior knowledge, students that encounter initial failure, that are maybe externally motivated, require much teacher help, and efficiency is important. When we're using implicit teaching, it's for students that have good prior knowledge, they may readily succeed in learning, they are intrinsically motivated, need limited teacher help, and students will have time to self-discover. Some say this dichotomous thinking of either implicit or explicit instruction doesn't produce positive student outcomes, particularly for diverse learners. For this reason, principles that incorporate both implicit and explicit approaches should be considered in the general education classroom. Coyne and colleagues considered both implicit and explicit approaches to identify 6 principles of effective instruction that can be used to teach reading, writing, and math, social studies, or science in the general education environment. These are big ideas, conspicuous strategies, mediated scaffolding, prime background knowledge, strategic integration, and judicious review. We will talk about each one in greater detail next. The first principle is focusing on the big ideas of a content area. With a standard-based curriculum, teachers often find themselves trying to cover so much material that it doesn't allow for deep understanding of the content. In this scenario, only the highest achieving students are likely to learn. Big ideas are highly selected concepts, principles, or rules, or strategies that facilitate the most efficient and broadest acquisition of knowledge. It's the idea that by linking several little ideas together, students will gain thorough knowledge of the most critical aspects of a given content. For example, in reading comprehension, a big idea is story grammar, which refers to the specific elements of a story. These story elements can include characters, a conflict or problem, attempts to resolve a problem, and a theme. Story grammar is a big idea because most stories, no matter how different they are, likely contain these elements. A well-known big idea in writing is the writing process. The steps of the learning process will most likely always be planning, drafting, editing, revising, and publishing, no matter what the writing piece is. For social studies, a big idea can be problem-solution effect. This can help students understand that individuals, groups, or governments often react to problems with identifiable causes and solutions. The second principle is using conspicuous strategies to teach the big ideas. This involves the teacher explicitly sequencing the steps in learning instead of having students discover on their own. Oftentimes, experts have difficulty identifying or explaining strategies they use to solve problems. This has led some to believe that strategies should not be explicitly explained to students for fear that they may just memorize the steps instead of understanding how to use the strategies in various situations. The problem with this is that extensive research strongly suggests that all students benefit from having good strategies made conspicuous or made visible to them. With conspicuous strategies, higher performers learn in a timelier fashion, while lower performers learn as opposed to not learning. The third principle, mediated scaffolding, involves providing temporary support while students are learning new material and then fading this over time. Scaffolded supports can be provided through a variety of means, including dialogue and materials. Scaffolding through dialogue includes modeling a procedure, concept, or task, or providing hints or questions throughout a task. Scaffolding through materials involves the use of visual prompts or cues to help the student perform the task. These include cue cards, anchor charts, checklists, or visual models of completed tasks. Just as with scaffolding through dialogue, these prompts and cues should be gradually faded as the student becomes more confident and competent in performing the task. The fourth principle, strategic integration, involves the systematic sequencing of instruction to show relationships between old and new knowledge. It is the idea that some elements interrelate naturally, and combining them will lead to a new and complex knowledge. Examples of strategic integration would include integrating the relationship between addition and multiplication, or subtraction and division in math, or integrating the concept of density, heat, and pressure when teaching convection in earth science. The fifth principle, prime background knowledge, refers to incorporating related knowledge students must have in order to successfully learn a new concept or skill. This is the most transparent of the 6 principles. For example, knowing about planets is going to make it easier for me to comprehend a story about planets. It is important to note that even very brief and informal assessments can provide information on student background knowledge. You don't just want to assume they have it. The 6th principle, judicious review, refers to the process of systematically reviewing previously learned content to ensure the information will be remembered. Research has shown that a good review contributes to enhanced memory and is closely related to goals such as fluency. It is the process of repeatedly considering material, but doing so in a sensible and well-advised way so that what you teach will stick. It is important to make sure that the review is going to be meaningful for the student. If we teach something trivial, review it, then what is retained will be trivial. Carnine and colleagues identify 4 critical dimensions of judicious review. The review must be sufficient to enable student to perform the task without hesitation. It must be distributed over time. It must be cumulative, with information integrated into more complex tasks. It must be varied, so as to illustrate the wide application of a student's understanding of the information. This module talked about principles of effective instruction. These are principles that can be used as general guidelines when developing, selecting, or modifying instruction in the general education classroom to ensure all students have the opportunity to be successful. For more information, please visit the Kentucky Avery website at www.kyavery.org.